Hello everyone, it's Benny, and welcome back to the 2D platformer tutorial series. In this video, we're going to be doing the plan. We're going to be creating the big master plan behind our 2D platformer game. And it's about this point that a good portion of you are going to be asking, hey Benny, WTF man, why are we doing this planning nonsense when we could just be diving in and creating something awesome? And there's actually a few really good reasons why you want to do at least some basic planning before starting building your game. Probably one of the biggest ones is creativity. And there's a few ways this can help creativity. One, you don't have any restrictions in place yet. There's no, oh, this is what I can do with what I have, and this is what I can't do. So you can pretty much go all out. This is your imaginary planning world. You can do whatever you want. And so there's a lot of room to be creative here because there really isn't any restriction yet. And that's good. Not only for that, but also you have a whole bunch of ideas out right at the start. And before you even start building anything, you can start seeing how your ideas are going to fit together. And you can even start figuring out what sort of things are going to work together and what things aren't. Right at the start, before you even do anything. And there's a lot of value to that. Another really good reason to do planning right at the start is once you have an idea of what sort of basic ideas are going to go into your game, you can build a roadmap for yourself. And you can have a clear plan of exactly what you're going to do when to create your game. You can essentially write out a guide for yourself of how to create your game. Which is kind of cool in a lot of ways, because then you don't have to figure out, okay, I got this thing, what do I do next? There's no sort of designer's block, if you want to call it that. You know what you're going to do, so you just do it. And that's, again, there's really a lot of value in that. Another thing is, if you follow the technique I'm going to show you, this works for any game you want to create, regardless of whether it's a 2D platformer or anything else. So you can create whatever game you like with this. So there you go. That's really why we're doing this planning thing. Hopefully I've convinced you. If not, again, you're free to skip this. You can do whatever you want. Again, time tags are in the video description, as I said in the FAQ video, so feel free to skip forward, skip back, skip wherever you feel like, whatever interests you. And yeah, so let's talk about the first phase of planning, the brainstorm. So, the key to successful brainstorming. Write down anything and everything that comes to mind. Even if you think it's a stupid idea. Even if it doesn't make any sense. Even if it's totally irrelevant to what you're trying to do. Because you never know what's going to inspire a good idea. And you can write down absolutely anything here. It could be something a little abstract, like maybe I want my game to be fast-paced. So there we go, that's something I can put in the brainstorm. It could be something a little more specific, like I want there to be lava in my game somewhere. It could be something very specific, like maybe you can throw items into lava to make them explode and damage nearby enemies. You can put down anything. Another thing, maybe we can damage the terrain somehow. And maybe we can make new passages through the level by breaking terrain. So there you go. Anything can go in a brainstorm. Even if it's something you think is stupid, like maybe character is secretly a grass monster. Or, oh, even better. Character is too heavy to move. You might think that sounds totally stupid. This is a platformer. How can you have a character that's too heavy to move? Well, maybe character has a pair of rocket skates that he moves around with. And maybe, hey, how about this? Maybe character can lose his or her rocket skates, and then needs to do something to get them back. Like, I don't know, maybe character has a lasso that they can grab rocket skates with. You know you're having a good brainstorm when your idea starts sounding a little ridiculous, because that's when you start thinking outside the box and getting new ideas. So there you go. We've just come up with a new game mechanic, just from an idea that originally sounded pretty stupid. Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to use it in the final game. Just because you have something to brainstorm doesn't mean you have to include it. But that's the point of this, just come up with new ideas. And again, it doesn't have to make sense, it doesn't even have to be relevant. Like, I like ice cream. I mean, hey, who doesn't like ice cream? So, maybe we have an ice cream world level, where whole level, just nothing but ice cream. That'd be amazing. Maybe it's a secret area. Maybe there's like some dude there. Maybe ice cream dude. Maybe he's like the ice cream version, I can type it, of Santa Claus. And maybe he has a massive ice cream factory. And maybe ice cream factory is broken, and then we have to fix it. And then after we fix the ice cream factory, we get ice cream freezing power. And then we can use that to freeze enemies or create slippery surfaces. So there you go. Whole slew of ideas just from the idea that I like ice cream. So again, you never really know what's going to give you a different idea. You never know what's going to inspire you. So just great brainstorm. Write down anything and everything that comes to mind. Just write it whatever. And eventually, once it starts becoming really hard to just come up with anything, not at the beginning, but after you've started going, and then it becomes hard again, that's probably a good point to stop. So, yeah, so there you go. We got a brainstorm. I am actually going to stop here just for the sake of finishing this video sometime this month. And yeah, so I'm just going to stop here and move on to the next phase. But again, for you personally, I recommend just keep going until you really just can't come up with anything else. So, after you've finished your brainstorming, it's time to figure out how all those ideas fit together into a complete working game. And you do this by pretty much asking two questions. What does the player do? And what makes it challenging or fun to do that? And it's really that simple. So I like to just make two lists of things the player does and things that make those things challenging or fun to do. And unlike when you're brainstorming, when you're doing this, when you're doing the game elements phase of planning, as I like to call it, you don't want to throw everything in the kitchen sink at it. You want to be a little conservative. Just start very simple and only add as it's needed. So what does the player do? The most basic thing the player does in a platformer is simple. The player can jump. Simple as that. So, the player can jump. But what makes it challenging? What makes it fun to jump? Why is this part of the game? And what makes it fun or challenging to jump is gravity. It's the thing that opposes us. It's the dark and evil force opposing our jumping. And why does gravity make it hard? Well, because with gravity, some areas are high up and hard to reach. And also, maybe, there are some pits that should be avoided. So, that's jumping, and that's what makes it more of a challenge, what makes it a little bit fun to jump around a bit. So that's the most basic thing the player does in a platformer. Obviously, we can't have a game that's nothing but jumping. So, let's add a few more things here. What else can the player do? What can the player do other than just jump? Well, you can also move left and right. We can't move up and down because, well, that's done with jumping. So what makes moving left and right hard? Well, when we're moving left and right, there are some hazards that we should probably be avoiding. Like, for example, maybe there's enemies around, and perhaps they'll damage us, or damage the player when he walks into them. Or perhaps they can throw projectiles at the player. In fact, that makes it more intense. Let me throw deadly projectiles at the player. So that's something. Maybe there's dangerous terrain, like maybe lava or spikes. So, there you go. And you'd be getting these ideas, these things I'm adding here, either from your brainstorm, or maybe you're coming up with some more ideas now. Either way works. So there you go. This is the basic idea of a platformer. We can jump, we can move around. Jumping is difficult because gravity is making it hard to get to certain places and is pulling us into pits that we don't want to fall into. And moving left and right's a little bit of a challenge because we have enemies and dangerous terrain we can run into. So that's the basic elements of a platformer. So, although we have the basic mechanics of a platformer written down here, this isn't quite enough to make a complete game. So what else does a player do in a platformer, other than just jump and move left and right? Well, another thing they do is they collect items. And what makes that challenging? Why would it be any challenge to collect an item? Well, items can be difficult to acquire for several reasons. Again, these probably be coming from your brainstorm, or you can just come up with them on the spot. But they could be things like maybe they're guarded by hazards. So maybe there's an enemy blocking it, or maybe it's over a lava pit. Or maybe some of the items are literally dangerous themselves. Maybe there are cursed items that hurt you. Maybe some items are hidden in secret areas. Maybe some items are literally invisible, so you can't see them until you acquire them. And so these are just some things that can make items a little bit more challenging to collect. But in this case, there's another part to that question. We know what makes collecting items challenging, but what makes it fun? Why would you care about collecting these items in the first place? Well, there are a few benefits, if I can spell it right, from items. The most basic one, that you probably see in tons of games, is you can get points. But that's not really much by itself. So what else can they do? Well, they can open doors. Perhaps they can unlock secret areas. Perhaps an item could give you a power-up, and maybe that can make you breathe fire or fly or something. I don't know. Just do some cool thing that you couldn't do without the item. So that's really how you're going to think about most of the things you put down here. Some of them are just basic mechanics, like jumping. There's really just what makes that challenging. There's not really... It's more of a utility thing, if that makes any sense. That's why we're not really putting down much of all the rewards for jumping. But for things like collecting items and most of the things you write down, there'll be a little bit of risks to it and a little bit of rewards to it. And that's why this is sort of a two-part section. What makes it challenging to collect items, and what makes it fun to collect items. So one more thing. What else does a player do? Well, other than everything we have here, they can exit to another level. And what makes it challenging to go to another level? Well, obviously, it's behind a lot of hazards and Also, there's probably going to be and it's probably near the end of the level. I'm going to put that on not never line here. And also, well, yeah, that pretty much sums it up. That's what makes it challenging to get to the next level. There's lots of hazards in the way. It's near the end of the level. But what are the rewards of it? Well, what makes it rewarding is you get to see new level with new things in it. So, or in other words, exploration. You get to see new things. Another thing is perhaps there are some hidden levels that are a little bit hard to find until you found it. So, that can be another interesting thing to go into new levels. And really, this is pretty much all there is to the basic mechanics of a 2D platformer. Now, of course, you could keep going. This is a pretty vanilla set of mechanics. There's tons of other things you could add, but again, in interest of just keeping this short, I'm going to leave it here. If you want to come up with more stuff, which I recommend you do, then go for it. But again, in the interest of just keeping this planning simple and to the point, I'm going to leave it here. And one more thing I'd like to mention before we move on. Kind of like with brainstorming, just because you write something down in your game elements thing doesn't necessarily mean you have to include it in your final game. Now, hopefully, a lot more of the things in this game elements thing will be included than in your brainstorming phase, because it's a little bit more organized, a little bit more conservative than just throw every idea you have out there. But still, maybe we're not going to have any cursed items in our game. Maybe we're not going to have any literally invisible items, just for example. Or maybe we're not going to have any spikes that can hurt you. Again, this is still sort of in the idea phase, so feel free to put something down even if you're not totally sure that it's, going to end up in the game. The most important thing here is that you have things organized in a format that, makes sense for game development. And one more thing I forgot to mention real quick. If you're having trouble coming up with some of the things the player should be able to do, again, look at your brainstorm. I haven't really used it that much here, but your brainstorm really should be your guide in creating these two lists, and figuring out what the player should do and what makes what the player does challenging. So, make liberal use of that. That's my recommendation. So, now that we have this nice overview of all the things that are going to be in the game, or at least most of them, it's time to start getting a little bit concrete, a little bit practical, and a little bit technical. We're going to be figuring out, from these mechanics, what do we need to make them happen? What do we need to actually put these in a game? And there's really no right or wrong way to decide what sort of mechanics or how you're going to implement all this stuff. Just sort of take a high-level overview of, based on all the stuff you come up with, what do you need? And probably the biggest thing I see that we need here is we need a level. We need some way of storing all the things in the game, and saying this is an enemy, this is a player, these are items, etc., etc. So we need a level in some form or another. And how are we going to create a level? How are we going to actually design levels, store them, do whatever with them? And I think probably the easiest way to do this is to store, or I should say, primary data stored in image file. That's how we're going to specify these are items, these are players, these are whatever, these are the textures they use, so forth and so on. And the only thing is, we're probably going to want multiple layers to level, so we can make a distinction between foreground and background and such. So we're going to have layers organized like a sprite sheet. And if you've never seen a sprite sheet, well, not sure how to really describe that. It's just sort of set out like an array. So we're going to have one sort of square representing the background, another square next to it in the image representing the next layer in front of that, and another square representing the layer in front of that, and so on. And we're also going to store some level information stored in JSON file. And this is stuff like what image file, well, obviously, what image file has level data, things like level name, possibly, things like, I don't know, what music file is played during the level, and just various information like that. Now, I haven't really talked about how our primary data is stored in the image file. Since I've done this before, I happen to know a good way to do that, but you might not necessarily know that at that point, and that's okay. Remember, this is all sort of preliminary stuff. You don't have to know everything for sure right off the bat. So just keep this high level if you need to. I'm going to go ahead and write it down just to tell you what I'm going to be doing, but if you're creating a game on your own, just know it's okay not to know as much of this implementation stuff as I do. It's just, I happen to have done this before. So anyways, now, you may know that in an image, every pixel in an image is typically divided into 4 components. The red component, the green component, the blue component, and the alpha component, or the transparency. And this is the typical format of an image file. Every pixel has some red, green, blue, and alpha, and just repeat for every pixel in the image. So the way we're going to work, or the way this is going to work for us, is we're going to assign each component to have some special meaning about the level at that particular point. So red, I'm going to have as being just a generic data index. It's some number that tells us something about the data. And this could be something like, for example, the index of sprite in a sprite sheet. Or if this is like a level exit, for instance, this could be which level is next at a level exit. So just some generic index that in our program we can recognize and do something with. Green, this is just going to be generic flags, like things like, I don't know, does this object block things? So is it solid? In other words. And just things like that. I think really, does it block things is the only thing we're going to be having there, but, you could add more if you like. For blue, this is going to be our entity type. So, 1 is going to be in some type of entity, 20 is going to mean some other type of entity, so forth and so on. And really, this is the key thing here. Blue is the key component. This is how we know this is a player, or this is an item, or this is a deadly enemy that you don't want to run into. So, just things like that. And you might be wondering, well, how are we going to know 1 is this type of entity, 20 is this type of entity, 30 is this other type of entity? And we're not going to handle that in the level itself. I'm going to say entity specification handled elsewhere. And our A component, unused. I don't really think we're going to have any, or I don't think I'm going to have any particular need for this. If you have something else you'd like to have for everything in the level that isn't covered by this, feel free to use the alpha component for something. In my system, I haven't really used it. And once again, you really don't need to know this much technical detail about how exactly your level is going to work and stuff at this point in the thing. Again, I just sort of have experience in it. But with that, we now know how our level is going to be set up. But aside from level, we're also going to need a game engine to run the level, and we're also going to need this entity specification thing for our level. So there you go. And really, at this point, you can see that this pretty much covers everything. Once we have a level that specifies all these things we have in our list, and we have the game engine to run the level that has everything in the list, we've pretty much covered the whole list. We pretty much have a working game at this point. So there. So how's the entity specification going to work? Well, pretty much we're just going to have a JSON file specifying different types of entities. And that's pretty much how the entity specification is going to work. That's all the detail I'm going to go into here. So how's the game engine going to work? Well, it's going to load, parse, and simulate a level from the level file. Oh, it reminds me, something else. Since we are creating levels in this image file thing, it might be a little useful to have some of that done automatically. So maybe we're going to have some config file that to generate parts of the level automatically, just to make things a little bit easier. And yeah, this is a big thing the game engine is going to do. It's also going to read user input and, I guess, simulate level accordingly. So if we read the jump button, the game engine should know, hey, that means I should make the player jump. And that's pretty much the high-level overview of what we need to do to make our game happen based on all these ideas we have. Once again, I'm going to say this a third time because I think it's very important. You don't necessarily have to have as much detail as I have here. It's really just have some idea of how these ideas are... Let me phrase that differently. You should have some idea of how your big game elements plan is going to actually be working. Just some general idea. It doesn't have to be as specific as this. So yeah, and that is really all there is to the plan. If you have enough detail in your, I guess, your specification, for lack of a better word for this, then you optionally can start making like a literal timeline and roadmap of, I'm going to do this, and this to make the game. I don't think it's necessary to do that much detail, at least not for something like this, but it's something you can do. And with that, that's really all there is to the planning. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned. But how do we implement all this? How are we going to actually get started with all this? Find out next time on the 2D Platformer tutorial series. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.